We are talking Blackwood. This is written and directed by Chris Canfield and is a horror western action movie. It focuses on a group of mercenaries or outlaws essentially, and they are tasked to go to this particular kind of area which has had all these legends about something supernatural in them, and they believe that they will find ultimately gold there. And along the way they run across this female Native American woman who has killed one of these kind of like gang of outlaws. And then she has her reasons for doing that. And ultimately this kind of group of people go into this area where they face the wrath of the Wendigo, a carnivorous supernatural creature who has, somewhat of an appetite for human flesh. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss what we think works with Blackwood. So this is a low budget movie. And the budget does kind of show through, but there are some things here I think the movie does actually fairly well. Number one for me is I think the acting was pretty solid in this film. I think all of the cast here do a believable job. Sometimes in lower budget movies, you'll find that the acting can be a little bit hit and miss. It's people with not a lot of acting credits, things like this, or maybe people kind of starting off in their career. But whatever the reason, all these actors here, I actually think did a pretty good job making kind of somewhat kind of believable kind of characters with good performances. And speaking of characters, I actually think the character work here is also pretty good, which is mainly down to the kind of the writing here and obviously the actors' portrayal of the characters. We have this kind of gang of outlaws, and we have a real kind of like, kind of a load of different type of personalities. We have the kind of the leader who is sort of very disillusioned. We've kind of got the crazy guy who's not kind of all there. We've got another kind of this kind of Native American guy who's on their kind of side, who's turned his back on his people. So we have some decent kind of character work as well, and everyone feels very distinct. So we have this group of people with very distinct kind of personalities, which I thought was down again to the writing and the kind of the acting. So good character work, good acting. I have to say as well, I think the kind of the look of the movie, the aesthetic, certainly in regards to the kind of the Old West stuff. So I'm not talking about the supernatural element here, but there is a real kind of like griminess to it. Sometimes I've reviewed a few kind of lower budget westerns, and everyone's a little bit too clean. The kind of the clothing, the kind of the makeup, the kind of the sets, they look a bit too sort of like, freshly produced, shall we say. But here, I have to say there's a real like griminess and grittiness to the kind of the aesthetic. Despite its kind of low budget limitations, we see these people dirty, with kind of like worn clothes. I think some of the aesthetics on the kind of the location shooting, looks good. It looks like run down kind of like basic kind of like structures and things like that. And then we just see some kind of like some establishing shots, some kind of world building. For example, we have a panning shot and we just see this this random guy like eating like this corpse of a deer and things like that, which kind of gives it this kind of real like wild kind of feel to it. And I have to say as well, it feels like a genuine dangerous place, because it just seems like everyone is more or less out for themselves. The kind of the establishment of the kind of the characters here and the kind of the world that these people are living in are just like, it's quite brutal, with everyone kind of really just being trying to get one up on each other. So I think the world building here is pretty solid. And on a technical level, I think the kind of the way this movie is shot, I have a little bit of a mixed feeling of, but because it does feel a little bit too contemporary at times. But I got to say, purely from a technical standpoint, the movie's well shot. You never kind of like feel that you're missing something, that it's well edited and kind of good sound design, things like that. So let's transition to what I think maybe the movie struggles with a little bit. So as I just alluded to, I couldn't help but feel this movie just looked a little bit too contemporary in the way it's filmed. It might have benefited just from having you know, a little bit of maybe grain or something like that, or, you know, to give it this kind of like this feel. It just, everything that feels a little bit too crisp in regards to the way the film looks, outside of the kind of the aesthetics of the costuming and the kind of the locations. I'm talking about the actual film itself. Just seems like it's kind of a shot on video. You know, it has this kind of like fakeness feel to it, which I think is probably down to the budgetary restraints more than anything else. Story-wise, it's not a particularly kind of deep film. It tries to have like some interesting motivations for some of the characters, which was good. But the actual narrative of the story, where this kind of, you know, the journey that this film takes us on is, you know, is somewhat kind of limited in scope, I have to say. But the thing that I think the movie falls most on is the horror elements here. I actually think it would have been better not to have them, if I'm honest, and have some type of different kind of situation, because the movie really falters on the kind of the horror elements here. The actual Wendigo itself, they kind of build it up, but it's very disappointing aesthetically. The creature itself, you can barely call a creature, if we're being completely kind of honest here. Now, Wendigos, you know, sometimes it's like a spirit that kind of inhabits people, but here it's kind of described before we see it as this, you know, large, twice the size of a man. It's got massive claws. It's quite disappointing, and even I think how this thing is dealt with on screen, it just is a little bit kind of like, that's not particularly kind of impressive. It's never really kind of like filmed in a way that's scary. This kind of goes back to this kind of the movie, that the way it's filmed, it just feels a little bit kind of like fake at times. Like we have this like gush of like dry ice that comes in, and the kind of the Wendigo is in there, and it just has this kind of like contemporary sort of like low budget feel to it. The movie fails to kind of really give us much in the kind of the way of atmosphere and scares. I mean, there's a couple of okay kind of gore shots here, but it just doesn't ever really feel like a, you know, it's barely a horror film, because it doesn't really, even though it's got a supernatural element, it's not filmed in a way that's particularly kind of horrific and ultimately quite disappointing. It's, you know, it's, as the film goes in its kind of final act, I don't know, to me it was a little bit kind of predictable as well, in regards to who's going to be left standing and things like that. The movie doesn't really kind of offer any real surprises here in regards to, you know, where it's going to turn out and things like that. It was quite predictable. You know, I think maybe this film could have been better from having just being a pure Western and having some other kind of like, you know, thing that these people were going to go against. Because I feel that its biggest detriment is its lackluster, very much so, supernatural elements here. And I even think that kind of the movie's marketing, if you look at the kind of like the artwork and, you know, the poster, it's playing down that supernatural element and kind of making it look more like a Western. So I wouldn't be surprised if the filmmakers actually kind of know this. So they, in my opinion at least, they should have either been a straight Western, or they should have really kind of looked at kind of like up in the ante and kind of regards to the kind of the supernatural stuff. Because they had some kind of decent characters here, if I'm honest. I think they just didn't really know what to do with them at the end of the day. So I think some of the kind of, I mean, for its limitations, I think the movie does do a good job in certain aspects. And it has some good characters, but the story is lackluster, and the kind of the way the kind of the supernatural elements are handled are I mean, they're not terrible, but they're just nothing special. And they are disappointing. So I'll give this movie a 5 out of 10. I'll be honest, I think I'm being somewhat generous with that. I would tend to give it a 4. But I will give it a 5 because I do think the movie succeeds in its acting and kind of character work, which does go a long way. So it's kind of a watchable film, but it's kind of forgettable. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.